biblical wisdom for flourishing. And I think it's important that for this month of May, that we kind of try to look at flourishing through some kind of relational wisdom that is grounded in the scripture. And I'm hoping that as we begin to kind of unpack our series this month, that we would keep track with some things that I'm hoping that the Lord might be bringing to our quarters. And so welcome. This is Victor Counted, and this is biblical wisdom for flourishing. This week, I want to talk about love as the basis of a flourishing life. And I say this because from the recently I reviewed, I edited a special issue on Christian flourishing science with the Journal of Psychology and Christianity, and we had that contribution from all the researchers that are doing research within the specific field. We took in the special issue, I took a domain-based approach based on the work that I've done with my colleague Kate Long and Tyler Vanderville, as we conceptualize human flourishing, Christian flourishing rather, taking that domain-based approach. And what that means is the idea that Christian flourishing, it's ultimately multidimensional, involves the flourishing of the individual Christians, but also the flourishing of the congregation, which also has an impact on the flourishing of the broader community. So three things: individual Christian, flourishing congregations, and flourishing communities. And in order to understand that, we have to invite researchers that are working in these different unique nascent areas. And particularly with the individual Christian flourishing, which I think has a more, if you will, psychological appeal because it focuses on the individual. The two paper contributions in that particular domain, one was led by me, where I used abundant life as a framework to understand individual Christian flourishing, and we finished and came up with a Christian flourishing inventory, a measurement tool for assessing individual flourishing. And of course, this was not done just by me alone. It was a collaborative research or work that was done by myself, Tyler Vanderville at Harvard, and also Kate Long at Harvard, who are colleagues that I've been working with for the past 2 years on this topic. In addition to that, also there had been people that have also been part of this effort, colleagues from Baylor University, someone like Byron Johnson, Matthew Lee, and a host of other people, even Ev Worthington from Virginia Commonwealth University, were all part of this work. And so it took us 2 years to come to this point. And interestingly, one of the important aspects of our framework, as we look at flourishing of the individual Christian, and look at different dimensions, things like contentment and as an aspect of happiness and life satisfaction, health or wholeness, which have to do with our physical and mental health, but also meaning, right? Meaning and purpose becomes an important part of that, especially when we start to think about how we can navigate suffering. But at the same time, also, we had character as well, which also becomes fundamental when we talk about if truly you are a Christian, the fruit of the Spirit in you should generate a character that is a Christ-like character that is distinguishable. But also, a relationship also falls under one of these dimensions. And the last one was stewardship, not necessarily financial well-being or financial stability, but stewardship, because we know that if we're good stewards, that ultimately that we will flourish financially, we would have material stability once we'll be good stewards with our resources, with our time, with whatever God has blessed us with. And so this became the different dimensions of Christian flourishing at the individual level. But one of the things that underpins these dimensions, it's actually the theological virtues, faith, hope, and love. I want to focus on love for a second because that's the focus of today's devotional. And interestingly, that love stems from our relationship with Christ, which ultimately it's a loving relationship. The Bible tells us that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish. And this particular instruction or this particular sacrifice, it's really it's evidenced by love, but also one of the key factors or key thing that made this possible was love. And therefore, if within the Christian faith, love becomes a central virtue that really becomes the basis of a flourishing life, because it animates all the virtues. In fact, the Bible even tells us that love is the greatest, right? Faith and hope is great, but also at the end of the day, love is the greatest. The greatest of them all is love. And interestingly, that was the framing of our individual Christian flourishing. And I had another contribution on the individual domain as well from colleagues from Biola University and University of Connecticut, I think. One of them is Crystal Park, who is one of the leading figures in the psychology of religion field. She was a former editor-in-chief of the APA Psychology of Religion and Spirituality Journal. And also we had Elizabeth Hall. We had some theologian on that team, someone like Kelly Kapic, who came together to kind of come up with their own framework for Christian flourishing at the individual level, with focus on love as the central virtue, that love for neighbor, love for God, love for self as well. All this forms the very grounding upon which a Christian really flourishes, right? And this has an impact in terms of how we engage different psychological dimensions, our cognition, our emotion, and our behavior. And of course, both measures and tools are very complementary. One takes a more unique emic approach, and the work by my colleague Crystal Park kind of takes a more ethic approach, focusing on psychology to inform a Christian flourishing. And so the reason why I'm saying that is because love becomes very important. Love is the basis of a flourishing life. And so today I want to take a text from the book of 1 Corinthians 13, specifically from verse 4 to 7. It says that love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it always protects, it always trusts, it always hopes, it always perseveres. Love. It's a powerful stuff, because I think love is not merely just an emotion, it's an action. Love is not just warm. It's not just a warm feeling that we feel in our God. It is a daily, deliberate practice. In fact, Paul, writing to a divided and spiritually mature church in Corinth, he kind of gives us a vision of love that is deeply rooted in action, in character, in some kind of commitment. It is this kind of love that ultimately sustains relationship. Paul talks about this love as something that repairs division, because in the context of the Corinthian church, where there was a lot of division, he was speaking about love as something as the very virtue that community needed to enable flourishing. Of course, in psychology, we could talk about love as having three fundamental elements based on the work of Sternberg. One of the three dimensions of love in psychology that we do study is that love has passion, love is intimate, love also is about commitment. And there's three things. You find it in love. Of course, usually with love, it starts with intimacy, right? A form of relationship, a form of connection or spark. But that intimacy needs to be sustained through passion, right? There has to be some kind of fire that informs or rather fuels or reinforces the love itself. But more than anything, love is also about commitment. And this part of love, I think it's something that a lot of people don't pay so much attention to, because we focus so much on the intimacy. And then sometimes we manage to fuel the passion, and sometimes we just stop there. But the Bible tells us that love is kind and patient. In fact, what gets us to the commitment part is the patience that comes with love. Because real love ultimately waits. It does not rush others. It does not demand instant change. It creates space for people to grow. When you love someone, you're patient with the person as the person grows. In fact, for me personally, that's something I'm learning as well, because I'm the type of person, when I see people, I see potential. And sometimes I want them to see that. But love would force you to be patient with people, even though you're seeing a great potential in them. Merely telling them about that, they might not get it, right? But love will make you to be patient. and work with the person whenever they get it. And that's one of the things I like about coaches. And that's the main difference between a coach and a psychologist, I think, because psychologists will diagnose and see what's wrong and tell you what is wrong and give you an assignment on how to fix it. But a coach might see what is wrong and might not tell you what is wrong. They would want you to come to the point where you realize that's what's wrong, and also walk with you and allow you to get to the point where you're ready to take the steps, you know. But I think that if you could think about someone in your life who tastes your patience, someone that tests your patience, what would it look like to extend grace instead of snapping in frustration? Because at the end of the day, we realize that love always protects, it trusts, it hopes, and it perseveres. Love is not cynical. It doesn't give up. It assumes the best. Even when maybe what the person is thinking might not be the best, love hangs on through difficulty. In fact, one of the things I love in the final hours of Jesus, Jesus kind of shows love even as he was being betrayed. In fact, from the cross, he tells us, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they were doing." That is love that endures beyond offense in itself. Because if we're going to live a flourishing life, we must learn how to love. And a part of love is forgiving, letting go, and just assuming the best and focusing on the greater picture. Love is the foundation of spiritual maturity. Paul even makes this clear that faith and spiritual gifts mean nothing without love. That love is what really gives them meaning. So you might be gifted, and if you don't have love, it's really hit and miss, right? Because if you're gifted and you don't have love, your gift might frustrate you because you don't have a heart to work with people that may not have the same kind of capabilities as you do. And so what keeps you grounded is the love that you have for them. As you wait on them to grow and mature and crawl to the point that they are able to be what God has called them to do. In fact, in psychology, a number of studies show us that loving and supportive relationships enhance mental health. In fact, that was one of the longest studies that have been done in social science shows this, that at the end of the day, I think they followed people for, 75 years, I'm not sure. But towards the end of that study, they found that it came to this conclusion that social connection is at the very heart of what a flourishing life is. And of course, with that social connection, one of the things that sustains it is the commitment to love someone that is in your friendship group, to love someone that is in your social network, and loving someone to the point that when you love someone and you are committed to loving someone, and the social connection in itself endures. And so I think that love is not status. It is not success. It is about intimacy. It is about passion. Intimacy is easy, but the passion to sustain that, it's another thing. Most people get there, but some people oftentimes don't get to commitment. And so, as we end today, I want to ask you this question: who in your life needs more of your patience and your kindness this week? And is there a relationship where you really need to persevere in love rather than walk away? As you reflect on these questions, I hope that the Holy Spirit will help open your eyes to see the relationships that He wants you to walk on this week. God bless you. Victor Counted, this is Biblical Wisdom for Flourishing.